America is in trouble, and by putting deep spending cuts and substantial tax increases on the table, President Obama's Bipartisan Debt Reduction Commission has exposed deep fissures in both parties, underscoring the volatile nature and very long odds of any attempt to address the nation's long-term budget problems. Among Democrats, liberals are in near revolt against the White House over the issue, even as political forces push Mr. Obama to attack chronic deficits in a serious way. At the same time, Republicans face intense pressure from their conservative base and the Tea Party movement to reject any deal that includes tax increases, leaving their leaders with little room to maneuver in any negotiation and at risk of being blamed by voters for not doing their part. President Obama, on a diplomatic tour of Asia in which the fiscal condition of the United States has been a recurring backdrop, has maintained his silence about the particulars of the draft deficit reduction plan the Commission chairman had released. The only way to make those tough choices historically has been if both parties are willing to move forward together, he said at a news conference. And so, before anybody starts shooting down proposals, I think we need to listen. We need to gather up all the facts. I think we have to be straight with the American people, he also added. Democratic Party priorities in question. The liberals are already frustrated with the White House on issues like the Afghanistan war and what to do about the BUSH-era tax cuts, which expire December 31st, and are increasingly uncertain about Mr. Obama's willingness to fight for long-held party priorities. That question loomed over a meeting at the White House on Thursday between progressive activists and administration aides about strategy for dealing with the BUSH tax cuts in the congressional lame duck session that begins next week. Several activists who attended said in interviews that they sought reassurance after a report suggesting that the White House was prepared to acquiesce in extending the tax cuts for incomes above $250,000, as Republicans have demanded. While David Axelrod, Mr. Obama's senior strategist, subsequently denied that the White House position had shifted, the immediate suspicion among liberals that the administration was abandoning them reflected broader insecurity among the president's allies on the left that he would move to center for the rest of his term. Dealing seriously with these things is fraught with political peril for both parties, but at some point, not dealing with these issues is also fraught with political peril, Mr. Axelrod said in an interview. So riled are some liberals about the plan that privately several suggested that if President Obama were to embrace its major parts, he would invite a primary challenge in 2012. Republican congressional leaders, 3 of whom are on the commission, similarly remained neutral about the draft, even as conservative groups condemned its proposals to raise revenues or taxes. To these groups, the plans call to drastically lower income tax rates for individuals and corporations holds no appeal. That is, because the reductions are tied to proposals to restrict or repeal tax breaks for investors and corporations, with additional tens of billions of dollars in revenue left over to reduce deficits. The website of Americans for Tax Reform warned Republicans bluntly support for the Commission Chair plan would be a violation of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which over 235 congressmen and 41 senators have made to their constituents. Republicans would also be looking over their shoulders at the growing ranks of the Tea Party. Ryan Hecker from the Houston chapter said it would be a big mistake for Republicans to go along with tax increases. I think that is something that would not sit well with members of the Tea Party He also added, emboldened by their victories, Tea Party members are mobilizing for 2012 to work against any Republican who shows signs of compromising. In other words, more gridlock and more stagnation is on the horizon. With Republicans taking charge of the House, they face intense pressure to go beyond campaign claims and produce a budget with cuts that live up to their promises somehow. There is a ton of post-election survey evidence that the American people are fed up with rejectionism and want the parties to work harder to find common ground, said William A. Galston, a former advisor to President Clinton. But there's a caveat, and this is critical. While a majority of independents, Democrats, and swing voters are for compromise over standing on principle, a majority of Republican voters are against compromise and for standing on principle. And certainly, Mr. Obama's inclination before the election drubbing was to turn to major long-term reductions in projected annual deficits and to make changes that would ensure Social Security's solvency until the end of this century. But if he chooses a path like that, he must take time to educate the public about the trade-offs, said a Democratic pollster and strategist. What he did in healthcare was he engaged Washington without first trying to engage America. And on deficit reduction, has to work the other way around. For the next 2 years, who he is as president is as important as what he does as president. Also, the Federal Reserve's plan to buy more Treasury bonds has incited critics at home to complain of inevitable high inflation and financial turmoil. It turns out many foreigners are pretty angry too. They say the Fed's $600 billion program is a scheme to give U.S. exporters an unfair edge, one that endangers the global economy. So is it? Or is the Fed's plan a credible way to help end a desperate jobs crisis and revitalize a still tepid economy? But then again, there's something much bigger going on here. There are many different problems. And what about the war or the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? They are costing the United States government or taxpayers huge amounts of national treasure. And in either case, few dispute that Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke is taking a huge gamble. Whether or not his plan succeeds in aiding the U.S. economy, it risks triggering a trade war and encouraging dangerous speculation in financial markets. Many economists say the Fed didn't have much choice, not with U.S. unemployment stalled at 9.6% officially, short-term interest rates already near zero, and Congress refusing to spend more to jolt the economy. They've run out of bullets, said the director of the International Economics Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So the Fed has announced plans to print enough money to buy an average of $75 billion in Treasury bonds each month for 8 months. In other words, just print more money. And it has left the door open for more. Theoretically, the bond purchase program is intended to energize the economy by forcing down long-term interest rates. Those lower rates, supposedly, might encourage some consumers and businesses to borrow and spend more. But will the Fed's program really do that? Not likely, its critics say. For one thing, mortgage rates have already dipped to record lows without reviving the housing market, reducing high unemployment, or stimulating much growth. Would people and businesses that can't or won't borrow now at super low rates start borrowing if interest rates on loans dip a bit more and borrow enough to rejuvenate the economy? No, again, not too likely. And the Fed's move threatens to inflame global tensions. That's because of what happens when it prints more dollars to lower interest rates. More dollars flooding the financial system will cause the dollar's value to fall. That will make U.S. products cheaper around the world. It will also make foreign goods costlier in the United States. Americans will be less likely to buy foreign products, or so they say. Economies like Germany and China, which have ridden a wave of exports out of the recession, complain that the Fed's main goal is to lower the dollar's value to give U.S. exporters an unfair price advantage. They call the move hypocritical because Washington has long complained that China keeps its currency artificially low to boost Chinese exports. In September, the U.S. trade deficit with China amounted to $27.8 billion. That's just short of August's record high, and it exceeds the U.S. trade gap with the rest of the world combined. The U.S. trade deficit, the amount by which the value of imports exceeds the value of exports, narrowed 5% in September to $44 billion. But through the first 9 months of 2010, the trade gap is still running 40% higher than it was a year earlier. And the broadest measure of trade, the current account trade deficit, will reach 3.2% of U.S. gross domestic product in 2010, up from 2.7% in 2009. TD Economics forecasts. The current account gap includes not only goods and services, but also investment flows between countries. By contrast, TD expects current account surpluses of 4.7% of economic output in China and 6.1% in Germany. So in other words, among other things, the United States has serious economic and political problems. And these are continuing day by day. Again, Revelation chapter 8. When he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. 2. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. 3. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, but he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. 4. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. 5. And the angel took the censer, and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices, and thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. 6. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. The third part of the sea became as blood. 9. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, upon the fountains of waters. 11. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. The third part of the waters became wormwood, and many humans died of the waters, because they were made bitter. 12. And the fourth angel sounded. The third part of the sun was smitten, the third part of the moon, the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And yes, all these are more signs of the end times transition days, which is a continuing daily process happening all around the world.